Hello, Stevie.
Hello, Bo. We
So-
are back again.
Yeah, so it hasn't been much easier to set everything up. We're still getting our bearings on everything. And still trying to come up with a name. So if anyone wants to write in the comments and has any interesting ideas, what do we want to call ourselves?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a process, right?
It is a process. It's quite funny how for both of us. But, for me, for somebody who's always worked with actors in the background, I've never wanted to be in the foreground in the public space.
Yeah.
And here we are, putting ourselves into the public space. But I think we have to. If people are going to relate to what it is that we're trying to do, we do need to do that. But it is quite funny while we're setting ourselves up, still learning all of these technical jargon.
Yeah. So we were just thinking today, maybe people would want to know how we work, what our month looks like, and how we engage as coaches, as directors, as physios. We've got a lot of little hats we wear, and there's actually a lot of overlap. So it's not really this. We often think of ourselves in these very disparate roles, but actually there's this sort of continuum of work that happens in these spaces.
Yes, and although our histories come from different places, yours medical, mine creative. As you said, there's a hell of a lot of overlap. And I think ultimately, regardless of what we did with our first initial careers, we're very people-centric. We're very people-oriented. I think we've always, both of us, you and I have known each other since we were 13. So we've seen how we've engaged with the world at large.
Yeah.
So our overlaps are several, I would say.
Yeah, and it's quite funny. People often ask, what did I do from a trick? And I didn't do science. I did drama. And actually, I always say drama is the thing that helped me become a better physio. Being able to take on different characters that I may not understand what their world is like. So it increased my empathy, it increased my compassion, because I was able to access these different bodily states that weren't my own. So it really helped me as a physio to go I've never had an amputated leg, but there's something in me that's learned to be able to empathize with you and go, I can have an inkling of what that feels like.
It's funny, I say that often to student actors who come to me first. I always say to them, don't you think it's funny? And I hope people don't take this badly, but it's my joke. That acting is older than Jesus, because it goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks.
Yeah.
And I've always been fascinated by, why did every culture have storytellers, performers? What is the intrinsic need that every culture around the world has always had?
So how does that show up in your coaching? How does that sort of, it just makes sense that it would, but maybe it doesn't make that much sense to some people. How does that show up?
You mentioned empathy a moment ago, and one of the things that I think I point out very early on with my students is the responsibility of the performer, the social sense of responsibility. I think a lot of actors want to get into acting because perhaps they're looking for another avenue of attention.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I'm not so sure how many of them go into it with, shall we say, a soulful integrity.
Yeah.
But they learn that, hopefully, depending on where they go for training. But yeah, it comes up all the time. And early on in the process, we speak about the responsibility of the performer. Your job is to inhabit the human condition for an audience member who's you're never going to meet them, but they're meant to relate to you. They're meant to see their lives or parts of people's lives that they know in you.
And then when you're coaching somebody who's maybe not an actor, so they're not there for performance, what is that process in terms of inhabiting myself, who I am?
That's where it goes. Because of course, people who come for coaching are not looking to become actors.
Yeah.
But the process of becoming an actor, at least in the way that I work with people, has everything to do with emotional intelligence. It has everything to do with proactive listening, empathy, compassion. The words that I use with people, regardless of whether they're actors or not. Soul, spirit, and truth. I find that I use these, and energy. I use these words all the time. So for a non-actor, they have different needs, but they go to very similar spaces. And I think as a coach, what excites me about it, regardless of whether an actor or not, I'm drawn to the in the room moment of empowerment for a person. That light bulb moment, that breakthrough moment, that moment of I've confronted a fear, I've confronted a negative or a limiting belief in myself. And it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I had to go through that to actually learn who and what I am. And I think actors and non-actors have a very similar process.
So what is the tools that you might use with somebody? Like what is like to get to that aha moment? So I mean, you sort of talked a bit wider. What is like an actual practical tool that you'll go like, we'll get someone there?
There are quite a few things. One of the things I love to do with my students and my clients is this happens pretty soon into the training. I ask them to write monologues.
Oh, okay.
So this could be, for example, I'll give you an example of something that's happened recently. So I have a client who perhaps is going through issues with people at work or a personal problem. Maybe a problem they've been carrying for years.
Yeah.
Right? Perhaps somebody abused them years ago, and they've been carrying the gunk of that for a long time. So they come to me for coaching, and I always think, I know what you want, but to get to what you want, you're going to have to confront these things that you're avoiding.
Mm-hmm.
So the monologue is designed, and this is how I always say it to people. You're going to write a monologue, you're going to say it to this person, and in this world, that person has to listen to everything you say.
Yeah.
So don't edit yourself. If you want to swear at them for 2 minutes, go ahead.
Yeah.
But part of the exercise, and it's a weird word, I suppose, to call it that, is an exercise for something that's so personal.
Yeah, and I think writing is an interesting thing because writing is it bypasses a lot of our barriers, right?
Yes.
Because there's no.
It makes you contemplate.
Yeah, and you can also go like, okay, this page is for me,
Yes.
and I can burn it if I want. I can hide it away, so you can really be very authentic on the page.
Yes.
So I mean, I use a lot of journaling, and we do a lot of somatic dialogue. So it's like, talk to your body, and people are like, what do you mean talk to my body? Like, what the hell does that mean?
A lot of people don't know what that means.
Yeah, but going like, hello, liver, what's going on today? Like somebody who's maybe dealing with some of those issues. And I'm a physio, so it'll be like, okay, hello back, what's happening? What are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to, beyond logic, beyond like the thoughts about and the narrative about my back, what is my body trying to tell me in this moment?
A lot of people struggle with that because they're at war with their bodies.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in an age where people are so disconnected from their body unless it looks a particular way.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the emphasis is going. Don't get me started on somatic narcissism. I could do it for hours. And, nothing against people who work bloody hard in the gym. That's a hard thing to do. But of course, I have raised eyebrow for the motives.
Yeah, well, they're ways of engaging with your body. So this is also a very funny thing that happens with coaching and, physio even, is that people have this persona or mask, and sometimes it's, you run through that in your life. So you go to gym to make sure that you have validation, or you go to gym because you're listening to your body and your body's telling you in that moment, I need a bit more muscle and groundedness. Very different intentions. And I think this is the thing, to look at the outside actions of things doesn't give you the intentionality behind those actions. And I think a lot of my work, and I know your work as well, is about really getting crisp about intentionality.
I call them motives.
Yeah.
So sometimes the question will come up in a session where a client might say to me, but now how do I know if I'm doing something with integrity, or how do I know if I'm coming from an ego place? How do I know if where I'm coming from is a good thing or not, And I always say, well, the motive is everything.
Yeah.
So do you know your motives for doing a thing? E.g., we're talking about gym. Do you go to gym because you are trying to deepen and extend a kinder relationship to yourself that's about your health and a dynamic with yourself? Or are you going to gym because this is how you get narcissistic supply?
Yeah.
Do you go to gym because you want to be able to visually intimidate people in order to keep them emotionally distant from you? Or do you go to gym in order to create a connection to yourself? Motive is everything.
Yeah, and there can be a violence around that, so this sort of pushing of self. So, I treat a lot of sportsmen and some are really dedicated, and that's really just gives them joy. You can see like there's joy in this pushing their bodies, and there's this motivation to just be their best selves.
Don't you find there's a freedom with them?
There is definitely. And definitely they're also not just working on their bodies. All those people are working on mind, body, spirit, like you said, spirit and soul. But then there's the other types who, I almost say like they're pulling their meat bag through the streets. They're coming with lots of injuries. They've got a lot of anxiety underlying this training. It doesn't feel joyful. So, a lot of work with those type of people is like, okay, but you're coming now with an injury, a new injury every month. what is going on? What is actually going on in this pushing? Where is this coming from? And that's why we go often to, and we will talk about this in another video, is attachment styles and how do you negotiate your relationship with other people, but not just other people, but with what you're doing in your day-to-day life, your habits, your daily habits that you're trying to entrench. What is the motivation around getting there?
It's a tough thing because, something that you and I speak about quite a lot, and we see it all the time. People escape to what I want to call a logic or a rationality or a mind space. So in your example, there's such a disconnection from the body.
Even though they're doing bodily things, like they're doing very bodily things. So
but are they
it's quite
really
funny.
There? It's kind of like going through the motions, but not really understanding or being bold enough with yourself to have an emotional experience, which is going to come with, hang on, am I really tapping in or not? Because if I'm really tapping in, chances are, and I say this to my clients all the time, things will happen and you don't have to like it. In fact, you probably won't.
Yeah, you probably won't.
You probably won't. But what you like, and I say this with affection, is utterly irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, irrelevant, but also relevant. So it's often what we are drawn to is the thing we need.
Yes.
So, people who, like we're talking about, those people who exercise a lot and like push their bodies, they need to learn to be more in touch with their bodies, actually, ironically. And they're using the exercise to force their body to do things, but they're not really in touch with their bodies.
It's funny, I could say a similar inverted thing about actors.
Yeah.
That they want to be able to, shall we say, emote. But they're so completely disconnected from their emotional world. They don't even have vocabulary to describe their experiences.
Yeah. So, it's like, it's funny. I became a physio, so I touch people all day.
Yes. How lucky.
How lucky. It depends. It depends. People say, how can you touch feet all the time? I'm like, that's really not the worst thing. It's really not the worst thing. If you've ever worked in a hospital, dirty feet are not the worst thing. Let me promise you that.
I admire
But, in high school, I had to teach myself how to receive a hug. It was really difficult for me. And even for many years through my 20s, there was a part of me, if somebody put a hand on my shoulder, there was a part of me, not physically, you didn't see me do this, but inside myself, there was a part of me that retracted away from...
You used to jolt.
Yeah. So there was a part of me that used to, retract away from that care, from me being the center of attention, like I'm giving you this. So, I was attracted to physio and I was attracted to body work, but it's because it's the thing I also needed for myself, but I externalized it.
I think this is so critical, and I'm seeing it and feeling it so much more clearly at this moment in my life, that the work that we do with people is ultimately the work that we need ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think this is something else which is kind of beautiful, that you and I have known each other for the majority of our lives.
Yeah.
And we are going in such similar directions, and both of us coming from very traumatized childhoods, which we can do a whole set of videos about, and probably will. But isn't it intriguing that was part of how we bonded first? We bonded through that we had such similar trauma. We didn't call it trauma at the time.
Yeah.
But we
could recognize that we both had narcissistic fathers, and we recognized that we both had similar ways of dealing and ways of disassociating.
And our homes put us into very similar behaviors.
Yeah. And even, in high school, remember we started meditating together. We read Celestine Prophecy and we started a little meditation group.
Yeah. I've called you my soul sister.
Yeah. So the meditation group, and I think of how I meditated back then to how I teach meditation now. Not the same thing at all, yet on the surface looks very similar. You sat down, your eyes closed, and you were completely different experience internally. And I think that's the important thing with coaching, and realizing this internal experience is so important.
It's so full of dimension.
Yeah. So before, we talked, just a little bobblehead there, meditating. This might as well not have existed.
Completely.
I was just up here, and my consciousness was up here, and I was focusing on my breath here.
Yeah.
It was such a myopic experience.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it kept me quite stagnant for quite a while because I
too.
thought I was doing something.
Me too.
Yeah, but it's also part of the process, right?
It's part of the process, and to hold yourselves, ourselves and everyone that we work with quite kindly there, because we know what happens.
Yeah.
It's its own survival mechanism, isn't it? It's our brain, it's our chemistry, it's our own body trying to protect us.
Yeah.
But it takes so long after you've gone through trauma, in a word, to regulate and to have an intimate connection for yourself again that doesn't feel dangerous or frightening.
Yeah, and I think, kindness, it is just such an important thing. This kindness to self.
Yeah.
We're very easy to be kind to other people or think about pleasing other people. But this kindness to self, going, sure, I'm sitting meditating and all the stuff is coming up and it's really hard. Like, it's really hard and I don't want to feel this and I'm so uncomfortable. I don't know how to be with this. And being okay with not being okay
is the beginning.
And still now, even after, I teach mindfulness all the time. Like, I have workshops going, I'm teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction and still going, like, sometimes it's really difficult. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I sit on that cushion and I go, I don't want to be here. What am I doing? Mm-hmm. Other people are just, getting up and going for a run or a jog and I'm sitting here being with my shit.
Yes.
I don't want to.
Yes.
But it's in that don't want to go, okay, it's okay.
The thing about as I listen to you as a moment, it might seem so insignificant, but I think it's quite powerful. That one little ability of let me admit myself to myself. That one little thing, even if it's saying I'm having a shit experience, whatever it is. But to be able to be honest with yourself, I think, because I know you, unto itself is such a symbolic gear change from how things used to be.
Yeah.
That ability, it's self-talk. It's how do we talk to ourselves?
Yeah.
And do we encourage ourselves when we're not in the mood?
Yeah.
And do we say it's okay? I think my problem, and I know you share this, but the whole personal development and self-work industry comes with a lot of toxic positivity.
Yeah, yeah. And, especially these last 3-4 years, which have been difficult for everyone, COVID and all these things that happened, yeah. And, for me, I was working in COVID ICU. I went through quite severe burnout from that. And I've got all these tools, breath work, mindfulness, journaling. In the moment of like the Delta wave, I couldn't do any of that. Yeah, I had to sleep. I just was burnt out. And I went like, where is that person? I don't know where that person is. And allowing myself to be a bit lost and a bit overwhelmed and going like, it's absolutely normal.
Yes.
It's absolutely a normal response in our modern world to feel overwhelmed and anxious. Like, it's a normal reaction to all these overwhelming things that are happening in the world, happening in our lives, and to also have some space for that.
It's so true. I think, that phrase, as I've been listening to you, I'm reminded. I find myself saying this to most people almost every single week. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. What you're experiencing is normal. When in doubt, look to nature. She'll remind you how long things take. Look how long a tree takes to grow.
Yeah.
We are part of nature. We do live in a heavily narcissistic, capitalistic time that likes to conveniently remove human complexity.
Yeah. And, I like that tree analogy. It's like, if a tree got hit by lightning 50 years ago, you still see the marks of that. It's not like it disappears. It's not like it gets grown over. Like, you see the char, you see where it hit, you see where it split and made now 2 different parts.
Oh, yes.
So that's a lovely image because it becomes part of who we are. So, people want things just to stop.
Yes, which is its own sort of wishful thinking. That's quite delusional, actually. This idea that you could go through life and just remove things you don't like is a childlike view of the world.
Yeah.
Actually.
So we were talking about this in the mindfulness-based stress reduction I'm teaching. And we were just talking about how, we had these views of enlightenment, of like getting to this place where everything's just like still and it's just zen. And, I'm going to get to this point where everything's just wonderful.
Oh, you mean death?
Death. Yeah, exactly. Just quiet. Just turn off the music. But actually, you start to realize that it actually opens up the whole continuum of experience. Yeah. So after you become more in touch with yourself, it's not that you don't feel sad. It's you feel sadness to the depth of sadness. You really feel it. You have no barrier to your experience.
Yes.
in the same way, you feel happy to the heights of your happiness.
Yes.
Because you know it's also going to leave you. You know it's going to go.
Oh, but this takes years of practice.
Yes, and still not great at it.
We're still practicing it. But isn't it wonderful to know? Because you don't notice your evolution with the naked eye.
Yeah.
You know, it happens over a long time. And I always tease people and go, when did that happen? When did I catch up to you? Because it does happen.
Yeah.
But as you say it now, I'm quite moved by that idea of it because, you know, I know that the depth of despair and depression and traumas that both of us have been through, and that sadness in a word, as you say it, was something that, without quite realizing it, we were not avoiding, but sort of avoiding.
Yeah.
You know, and now to be, you know, in our 40s, practicing what we've been doing for I don't even know how long. And I hope people are reassured by this, that the practice is the point. That it's not a space you get to and think, okay, so I'll never experience sadness.
Yeah, like you were saying, we do journey process. Like
all the time. That I like to say, especially to my actors, that your emotions are your ally.
Yeah.
And negative emotion, let's be helpful to those who need it, is not the enemy. Negative emotion has kept us alive.
Yeah.
But we do live in a time where human beings do not normalize speaking about these things.
Yeah.
We don't normalize process language. It's strange, thank goodness, in the last number of years, and hopefully it keeps growing. But, you know, when we were in teens, the language was not normalized.
No, it wasn't developed. I mean, and you think of it generationally, like, boomers, Gen X, like they started to get in touch with psychological language. Like you don't have to explain to somebody the subconscious, the ego. Like it's now in our lexicon, right? Like we know what it's about. Now there's this new sort of thing coming up, which is, what we're talking about is like now there's like trauma, attachment styles, coping ability, fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
Personality disorder.
Yeah, so going like that's now starting to come to the fore. Finally. And by languaging things, we start to get to know them. But there's a proviso there. We can sit in the language of things, then we're up here.
Yeah.
Like, I know about trauma, but have you felt your trauma? Have you dropped into your body and felt that freeze response where your whole body just tightens up? Can you be with that? And that's often like in my coaching work, it's just being with.
Yes.
Like that is the work. And it's hard work because you want to run away.
Because being with means learning to make yourself a priority to yourself.
Yeah.
And saying the most important relationship I'm going to have with anybody on this planet is with myself.
Yeah.
First and foremost. Yeah. I always sort of giggle and think there is truth to that RuPaul phrase, if you can't love somebody else, how are you going to love yourself? How are you going to love yourself? How are you going to love somebody else? And I think that there is a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
But I think that the journey of loving self is not a place you land at. I think it's an ever-evolving thing.
Yeah. And when I'm coaching people, so we work with things called titration and pendulation.
Oh, yes.
Is that, we don't want to re-traumatize people. And I think that's where we were maybe in the 90s and early 2000s, definitely was like this, we're going to get in touch with our trauma and we're going to scream into the void. And it was quite hectic. And I've done a lot of those processes and they're not valueless, but they can be quite violent and they're quite a unkind way to contact something that's quite traumatized. This little child in us that is hunkering in the corner. So, titration is like, we're just going to titrate. We're just going to little bit of the trauma. You're going to feel a little bit of it. Like, let's do the homeopathic version, a few sugar pills under the tongue. So, I had a patient, and like all of us in South Africa know stories of this, who had a home invasion, was dragged by, the back of her hair. So she came to me with headaches. And she was at a psychologist because it's appropriate for her to go to a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. I am a physio and a trauma coach, resiliency coach. I'm not a psychologist. So just to say that to people out there is like, you've got to know your scope, right?
You should have a bit of a village and a tribe of people helping.
Exactly.
There's no silver bullet here.
So, I couldn't even touch her neck without this sort of trauma response coming up of breathing and her eyes started pinning.
Before she came to see you, did that happen?
It was like a month or 6 weeks.
It was very recent.
Yeah. So 6 weeks. And she'd been in therapy that whole time.
Right.
But she was having these severe headaches and she needed some help. And I'm known as a good sort of bridge between body and mind. So I think that's where my sort of interface and where I work is very great, is I know both sides. So with titration is just to slowly, like maybe I would not touch her neck. I might go to the middle of her back and touch there, yeah, and go, I'm just going to go up for a second. Just be with your breathing. Can you see it's going up a bit? How does that feel? Okay, that's a bit much. Go away from it. So give her little bits of my hand being there that is comfortable for her to digest. So that's titration.
Okay.
Pendulation is sort of very tied to that, is going towards the traumatic response and coming away from it. So going to a neck,
Yes.
and then going when it's too much, pendulating away, going down and say, okay, focus on your feet on the floor. Can you feel the resource of your feet on the floor?
Yes.
So a lot of trauma work is about resourcing and then going into the trauma. So if somebody doesn't have any resources to go to trauma, they're just going to feel overwhelmed. Yeah. So
You're
whether
resurrecting stuff.
Exactly. So you need to first start with resourcing, whether that's a resource externally, like me as the physio / coach working with her. I would be seen as a resource because I'm creating the safe space for her. She knows she can come into the room. And obviously that took a few sessions. Yeah. But by the second, third session, she's like, okay, I'm ready to work. I can go there because I've created this safe space, which for her is a resource she can tap into in order to deal with her trauma.
But the client leads.
Yeah.
As much as we would love to impart as much as we could as fast as we would like to, it really is dictated by a person's internal process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is also quite a beautiful thing, to lead a person through a journey that is about them. I think that's something you and I have always loved.
Yeah. Like you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to, you're literally just tracking you're leading from your own internal world.
Yes.
That's why you have to practice if you're going to be a coach. Like you cannot be a theoretical, here's a worksheet, do this. Fill in this and we'll figure it out.
I hate that kind of thing.
No, we're feeling in our bodies and going, oh, that's really affecting me. Like hearing her story of being dragged through a house, like, oh, I know that fear I have of ever that happening to me or any of my friends, and going, okay, can I be with that in myself first?
I mean, you talk about
very first.
That we had our break-in attack when I was like 9 or 10 years old.
Yes.
So I know that it puts you into another paradigm.
Yeah.
And if you've never lived it or had any sort of personal experience of it, it's quite difficult, I think, without knowing, people who have gone through that kind of trauma are re-traumatized by the general public who don't get it.
Yeah.
Or there's pressure to, but didn't that happen to you a while ago? Why are you not over that by now?
Yeah.
I mean, that happened to me when I was 9 or 10, and in my 40s, I remember everything that happened as if it was yesterday.
Yeah.
So our relationship to our stories, I think, is another thing. I find this with actors and non-actors, is the potency of knowing your story and then sharing your story. And I always use the word sharing, because it's not telling.
And what do you like? I just would like to get into that a bit more. Is what is knowing your story? Because now most people go like, I know what happened to me. I can give you the narrative. But for you, I get a feeling that knowing your story is a different thing for you.
It is. It's an acknowledgement and an admittance, and sometimes even a confession to self.
Okay.
That whatever had happened to me, I could flip over the script, or I should go into the subtext of, how did this really impact me? This is interesting. This comes up for actors and non-actors all the time. Can I admit truth to myself?
Okay.
Can I tell myself the difficult, horrible thing? I think that's one of the hardest things, regardless of what profession you're in. It's a human challenge.
Yeah. What trauma did I cause to myself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I tell myself?
Yeah.
Or am I telling myself, am I gaslighting myself? I use this phrase with everyone that I work with. Be cautious that you aren't gaslighting yourself. In other words, you aren't rewriting your history.
Yeah.
You aren't trying to phrase it in a way that might be more understandable or palatable to another person.
Yeah.
Let them choke. Really, they must choke. You have to be able to tell your story as it happened.
Yeah. Or as it happened for you, for your truth, right?
I mean.
So it may not be, sometimes it's, like they've shown this, I mean, it's, let's go into neuropsych hour, it's a little bit of research.
Yes.
They've shown this, that we can recreate memories, like it's very malleable. But it is very
and then our
true.
relationship to memory changes.
Yeah, but it's very true for you.
Yeah.
So, maybe not in a court of law, but for you, it is your truth, even though it's been molded by future things. And, the interesting thing in the hippocampus, which is it's like where we store memory, yeah? Trauma is not like time stamped. Yeah. Trauma feels like it's ever present. Our body doesn't know it's happened in the past. Our body goes, right now, I'm searching this room and I'm looking for triggers and I'm looking for things that are familiar to me, that I know that if I smell that certain cologne, I know that is that person who did that to me, and I know I need to be aware.
It's how our subconscious works.
Exactly. So, in the present moment, yes, logically I can go, oh, but he's dead, the person who did that to me. That cologne should mean nothing to me. But the body's going, oh my goodness, we know something's going to happen now. Like, put everything on alert. Oh goodness.
What do you say to your clients when they experience that moment? Like, what's the step for them to do after that?
So to give space to the experience, but also to come away from the trigger.
Okay.
Yeah, like come away from the trigger. You do not need to bathe in the trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
So the skill of
detachment and running to a resource.
Okay.
So, we often talk about fight and flight, and people, and I know for me as well, I saw that as a bad thing. Yeah. Like somehow we had to stop the fight and flight response in order to be regulated. But actually, that is physiologically how we're wired for safety. So before, maybe I would flight to alcohol to numb myself, yeah? But now I might flight to the garden and go, so it's still flight. It's still like I'm taking myself away from the trigger. Yeah. I'm going to go and feel the grass under my feet. I'm going to do walking around. Both are flight responses, but one is a bit healthier. One's a bit of a healthier expression. Yeah. And maybe a fight response, your trigger's there. And if you have enough energy within yourself, you might go to this person, hey, can you get out of my space right now? That would be a fight response that is boundary. Yeah. Fight.
I know we'll talk about attachment styles in another video, but as you're saying it, I'm so reminded of the folk who struggle with that specifically, I find, are the ones who practice codependency and they don't realize it. Yeah. In other words, these are people who don't practice, I know and hear myself to myself. I actually know other people better than I know me. So this idea of, okay, so I could go outside, I could anchor myself, I could walk on the grass, does not occur.
Yeah.
Because they're still locked in the emotional overwhelm and the narrative that is associated to the cologne.
So, like you asked what I do with people is, first you have to build this mindful capacity within yourself.
Yes.
So when awareness is quite myopic, your response and your triggering takes up the whole field of awareness. Like you cannot see the boundary of it. Yeah, you're so identified with being this triggered thought.
And hello trauma.
Yeah. You're so identified. It is you.
It is you.
Might as well be you. Yeah. It's like so merged.
Oh, yes.
So the first thing we talk about is just giving it space. Yeah. Just allowing your awareness to come a little bit bigger, give it a bit more space. Then relatively it becomes smaller. Yes. It's not that the responses go away. And I had a client who was talking about, she was dealing with a lot of PTSD and anxiety. And from the beginning, like it was before you'd see, like she's just totally overwhelmed by her response. Now she's like, no, I noticed the response was there, but there was another part of me, the resource part of her that we'd been building. And she went, but now I also had space for this other part of me, which I didn't have space for before.
Yes.
So now you got this.
My emotions wouldn't allow me.
Exactly. Not that the emotions are gone, but now your awareness is wider, so it can hold all these different parts of you because you're not just that trigger response.
This is where I find that, the neuroscience and neurolinguistic programming are especially helpful.
Yeah.
To understand that so much of what we go through is physiological. It's in our brains. It's not just in your willpower and what you've exercised. It's in your physiology. We're physical beings as much as we're thinking, feeling, talking ones.
Yeah.
We actually are bodies.
And what's lovely about that is that we take this with us. This is our experimental ground. Yeah. This is where we can do all the work. We don't need anything else.
No.
Right? We do need relationship. It is one of the things. We do need someone to witness our journey, or we need a coach or a psychologist or a physio or a director. We need somebody outside ourselves to yes, we give tools and we do all this sort of very performative stuff, right? It's part of it. But I think the biggest part of it, and this is actually coming out in a lot of physio research, the biggest part of it is just communication, witnessing, and being with.
It's so funny how our society has had to come right back to basics.
Yeah.
That what we all need as human beings, I always say this in my group classes as well, all human beings want to be seen and they want to be heard.
Yeah.
It's a very basic human need.
Yeah.
And if as children you've never had that, then your idea of the world is quite a dangerous, prickly one.
Yeah.
So to later on in your life, to learn some of the things that you and I are talking about can feel intensely alien.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that with those clients, and I haven't had a lot of those, who have been in, it's a weird way of saying it, but overly traumatized to that extent. But I do encounter it sometimes. Some people don't realize it, but they're so, they defend their agony, their pain. They almost stand up for it. So if you want to now address it as, well, let's talk about how this is not who you are. It's something you've experienced, but you're not what happened to you.
Yes.
Depending on where a person is in their journey, they will fight you on that.
Yeah, and it's that thing of, I keep hearing this quote, is hyper-independence is a trauma response.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's this, and even in our culture, it's very hyper-individualistic, and I'll get through it on my own, and these scars are mine, these wounds are mine, these stories are mine.
There's a narcissism to that.
Yeah, and it's about unhooking from that and going, these are part of me. They're part of what my ego has taken as stories and creates a sense of self, because that is true. But, both and. That's true, as well as this, awareness part of us, this part that can just look at it and hold it no matter what it is.
Completely.
It doesn't have a narrative about it.
Yeah.
It just allows everything. Yeah. It just holds it all. It's just a container.
But that, as we said, and I say this from my own experience, that took so long.
Yeah.
That took my teens and my 20s, I was going to say to learn, but it's more than learning. It's something that you had to encounter.
Yeah.
And that path of learning this more intimate relationship to ourselves is also quite messy.
Yeah.
And I think that the messy is actually the value.
Yeah, we need a bit of chaos to rile us up, because any structures that need to be broken down need a bit of a bit of a depth charge, a bit of a, it's always hard to change. It's always hard to move.
And there's such excitement. I say this to my actors. Fail on purpose. Make mistakes.
Yeah.
You actually want to make mistakes. Weirdly enough, that's where your confidence will blossom from.
Okay.
But you do not find confidence or self-esteem or faith in yourself by trying to be perfect. And perfect on its own is a trauma response.
Yeah. That perfection is so horrible.
So perfection and trauma teaches us, don't make mistakes. Don't discover your fallibility. Hide it.
Yeah.
And I always think this is interesting, whether you're working with an actor or not. You're hiding it is what's robbing you of your authenticity. It's robbing you of your vulnerability. It's robbing you of, frankly, everything that will make you reassured to yourself later.
Yeah.
And our culture encourages this. I look at my corporate clients, all of them are struggling. All of them in this corporate culture, which is so often toxic. And I wish I didn't have to say that. But it is. I know that it depends on organizations. Some of them are quite specifically not. But I am generalizing. But if I think about my corporate guys, they are struggling because they are trying to exist in a system that's been designed to not be understanding, empathic, or compassionate.
Yeah. And people going, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to heal. I don't know how to get there. And going actually, what you probably need is a 3-week sabbatical. That's what you need, but our culture doesn't offer that.
We're trees and we die.
Barking up the wrong tree. But we actually just sometimes need a bit of time. It can be something so simple. Yes. And we're looking for all this other stuff, and we're being told we need all this other stuff. When actually what you might just need is to have a cup of coffee and go sit in the garden for 3 weeks and not have any goals and not have any practices even. Not even a mindfulness practice. Just look at the tree.
That was normal for our species. Yeah. Once upon a time, it was normal to spend your days not in a hypervigilant mode.
Yeah.
Where We didn't have so much stimuli. We didn't have so much coming at us, and we didn't have so much that was expected of us.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm a great fan of Dr. Ramani, and she speaks about, the corporate culture being intensely narcissistic.
Yeah.
And narcissism fundamentally is devoid of, can we call it realistic awareness? Because narcissism is all about outcomes. It's all about self-serving. It's all about remove the gentleness that's required.
It's actually all about narrative, right? It's all about these
control.
goals and narrative and very logic-orientated thing that lock you in.
And it's dangerous to the human spirit, actually.
Well, maybe we should end off there, and let's pick that up in our next podcast. Let's go into a bit of narcissism and codependency. What do you think?
I think that's
because I think that's it's the thing of our time, right?
It really is. Let's do that.
Okay. Well, goodbye, everyone, and we will see you soon.
Bye all.